Hi everyone, back for another weekly astrology forecast. Day by day, play by play of all of the astro weather that's coming up this week. I'm going to do a quick little recap of last week. I know I skipped the recap in the previous weekly video in my attempts to cut to the chase or whatever, but I like to be thorough and I like to recap things because it helps me mentally come back up to the moment to talk to you about what's coming up. So just really quick, we had an interesting week last week. A lot happened. On September 28th, Saturn went direct. Saturn is currently in Capricorn and very powerfully placed there. As we know, that's one of Saturn's home sign is Capricorn. So Saturn is able to exert maximum Saturnian powers and Saturnian influence over our material world and to affect the quality of time in a pretty profound way. It's showing up in themes of restructuring our institutions, deepening our commitments, learning how to be more patient and more resourceful and persevering, but at the same time feeling a really heavy, sort of an inordinate amount of weight and limitation that's amplified by some of the difficult planetary aspects that happen this year with that really powerful Saturn. One of those being this recurring theme of the Mars square Saturn that happened on September 29th. Now, this is a repeat of a Mars-Saturn square that happened in August, as we talked about, that happened on August 24th. There's a role reversal. The one that happened on August 24th was when Mars was moving direct, but Saturn was moving retrograde. So Saturn was a bit slowed down and delayed, and Saturnian topics were really more deeply rooted or deeply entrenched, or maybe especially heavy around that time because of Saturn's retrograde. But then Mars was direct, so moving on course, doing these very potent, powerful Mars things that Mars can do in one of its home signs, Aries. So then there was the role reversal on September 29th, where now things have shifted. Now Mars is retrograde, but Saturn is direct. So things are starting to get, uprooted again, and things are starting to slowly move forward in the Saturnian front, whatever has got to happen with rebuilding and restructuring and fortifying the foundations and having a really intense critical look or intense discerning look at everything that we've built so far, collectively and personally. It's coming up for review and revision, and things that are meant to endure are going to deepen and solidify. Things that are meant to be restructured or reframed will be in the process of being broken down and restructured. So having a repeat of that Mars-Saturn square just probably reactivated or re-emphasized that general theme of frustration that's going on personally and collectively. I think it's interesting to note that that was the date of the presidential debate, which I feel archetypically, the two people that were locked in that very adversarial debate, if you want to call it a debate. I don't know how much progress they were able to make because of the very fraught tone. It's interesting that archetypically and symbolically, it was almost like a square aspect clash or conversation between, we could say, a very martial figure, very red, very overheated, and retrograde, so quite a regressive or reactive person, really working at cross purposes and not in harmony with another person who could be seen as somewhat, Saturnian, like an older person trying to assert some, soberness or some reality, or some grounding or something like this, but yeah, we all saw it, and we can weigh in on how we feel about that, you know, not wanting to get too political, just showing how these things can show up, like symbolically. You'll see something archetypically take shape around the time of a powerful planetary aspect, and maybe there's something more intimate that popped up in your life that carried that archetypal signature between a clash of Mars and Saturn, if that made sense at all. But things continued, and of course we had the Aries full moon that opened up October. And remember, we have a full moon. I don't know if I just said new moon. I don't know why I keep saying new moon. Full moon, Aries full moon opened up October, and then one will be closing out October. And I have a special video on that, the 3 powerful lunations of October, if you want to watch that and dig into that in some more detail. You know, so that was a pretty lively time. That was a very potent, you know, Aries full moon. As I said, that had a lot of juice. It was with Chiron, it was with Mars, its ruler. You know, then Friday night there was like a moon square Saturn with the moon on top of Mars that I noticed occurred on Venus's day during Venus's hour, and I don't know, but I feel like maybe that added some insulation or some buffering, because for me, who has late cardinal placements, it was pretty uneventful, except I had a really intense headache for a couple of days. So there could be physical manifestations if nothing like actually happens. It was actually a peaceful evening, but you know, it's just interesting to note that something happened. I had a headache and I felt, you know, internally kind of uncomfortable. But then, you know, the weekend we got that nice, you know, Taurus moon, and, you know, making a trine to Venus and kind of grounding and bringing everything back down to earth and solidifying and, you know, healing and restoring. So feeling much better. Oh, I love earth element. It can be so helpful to have your feet on the ground. And then of course, you know, the next day, as I've already started to reference there, you know, just to go through the recap in order, on Friday, Venus's day, Venus moved into Virgo. And you know, that's really lovely because Venus is a powerful planet that brings cohesion, enriches our relationships, attraction, you know, peace and harmony and art and all of these lovely things. So able to express Venusian powers in an earthy sign that guides us into discovering, you know, the world of nature or natural healing, or ways to use Venusian powers in a tangible, practical way that's useful. So remembering now, Venus will be in Virgo until October 27th. So Venus is in a position to make helpful and supportive trine aspects to all the heavy planets that are hanging out in Capricorn by Earth trine. So that can help. I talked about how that can offer like perhaps a bit of a ballast, and also harmonious trine with Uranus currently in Taurus. So that's a harmonious connection between Venusian powers and then the powers of change, funneling that or channeling that into an earthly expression that's a little bit more tangible and useful. And then, of course, the last major event last week happened on the 4th. That's when Pluto in Capricorn also went direct. And now we have the whole gang in Capricorn, those slower moving outer planets that have been major players in, you know, the economic events, the lockdown, the viral crisis, like all this stuff that happened this year. You know, as I think I said in one of the past videos, it's like the train is now leaving the station. All of these planets are moving forward, and they will continue to kind of finish out or close out the themes and the work that they're directing us to through Capricorn this year. And then at the end of the year, they're leaving that sign. So that was last week, you know, that was eventful. So, yeah, things are continuing in this very interesting and somewhat fraught year, but there's been some major shifts there. So to bring us up to speed, for this week, Monday, October the 1st, or the 5th rather, the first aspect of the day is early in the morning. The moon is still in Taurus at this point, so makes a trine to Pluto and then makes a trine to Saturn. So it's bringing that grounded Taurus sort of mood or emotional focus in tune with these really heavy outer planets, and bringing it into our intimate awareness in a somewhat stable way, stabilizing the emotions, helping us to contend with these powers of restructuring and transformation in a way that's, practical and stable, and maybe can feel a bit heavy and serious, but more in a way of acceptance and tuning in and figuring out how to deepen our commitments and ground down into a deeper sense of patience with that all, at least on an emotional level. So there's an opportunity for that, just until just like before noon on Monday. It's at that point that the moon goes void of course. That's that little blank passage where the moon has finished making aspects in a sign and has not yet moved into the new sign. So that's going to continue all afternoon and all evening. So again, those are passages that are really great for, checking off your to-do list, tying up loose ends, tending to anything that you've already got in motion, just to finish it up and tend to it. And then by 9 o'clock in the evening, the moon moves over to Gemini, the void of course ends, and then the next 2 days with the moon in Gemini, those are good opportunities to make those new starts or plant those new seeds of anything that we hope will take root long term. So of course, when the moon enters Gemini, that's a different feeling, it's a different vibe, that's a mutable air sign that belongs to Mercury. So it makes a general kind of mood or energy or lunar vibe a little bit more active. Maybe there's a bit more of a buzz. People are feeling a little bit more outwardly curious and a bit more social. Those are the types of energies or inspirations you can tap into under a Gemini moon. So it's usually pretty lively in general, and it's kind of poetic because we spend a whole weekend and most of Monday with that really grounded Taurus energy, recharging, fortifying, nourishing ourselves, being a little bit more reflective and contemplative, getting our feet, getting our bearings. And then it's just, timely that now it's time to kind of open up and explore ideas, brainstorming, chatting, lively exchanges, the sorts of things that, Gemini as a sign inspires. And certainly Gemini folks or people that have a lot of Gemini in their chart embody those attributes to some extent. So yeah, moon in Gemini can sometimes, if it's making major aspects, planetary aspects in your chart or moving through certain houses, sometimes you have a contact or conversation with sort of a Gemini type person, or you sort of do Gemini type things like being social, gathering information, getting really like curious and reigniting that sense of wonder and magic and play and shape-shifting, all those lovely things that Gemini embodies and inspires. So then we get to Tuesday. It's not a super eventful day for exact transits, but we early morning have a moon square Venus, which isn't, even though it's the square aspect, it's a bit, edgy and can cause a little friction. Square aspects, I also think, have a way of pushing on things and amplifying things. Like they tend to kind of amplify and intensify the energies of the planets that are in that 90-degree square aspect conversation. So if you can imagine, we've got this really like lively placement for the moon in Gemini that's like attention is moving outward, it's more dispersive, it's more curious. And then we've got Venus over here in mutable Earth, Virgo, you know, grounding and tending and beautifying and improving through that earthy sign. And it can just maybe make the energy for a time feel a little bit exuberant, or maybe a little bit like frustrated, but kind of in an interesting way. But, you know, to remember that both of those signs are ruled by Mercury. Mercury rules over Gemini and Virgo. So it could be like a bit of a restless time or an anxious kind of morning, but not anxious in the sense that it's anything, you know, really difficult or hard, because it's Venus. And it could just be, you know, a little bit of restlessness, a little bit of like creativity, or feeling like you want to go one way, but then also feeling like you want to go another. It can stimulate enthusiastic moods around romantic matters, things like that. There's just some free associations there. But it's a short transit, of course. All the moon's transits are only a couple of hours long. So it might just add a bit of a restless vibe to Monday morning. And then the moon moves on a little later in the morning, makes a sextile with Chiron that's associated with healing, ongoing wounds, tending ongoing wounds. So it can just bring that curious and active and inquisitive lunar energy in contact with those themes. So there may be an opportunity to reflect on those for a few hours late in the morning. Then on Wednesday, October the 7th, it's quite early in the morning, but there's a moon trine sun. So now we're at that waning side of the lunar cycle. We had the full moon last week, and now the moon is slowly losing light as it cycles toward the dark or the new moon passage mid-month. So right now the moon trine the sun means the moon is at like a 120-degree angle from the sun. So that's a waning gibbous shape. So that's like a moon that isn't quite full, but it's not exactly half. It's like right in the middle. So it's still a pretty energetic moon that still has a lot of juice and a lot of battery power, but it's starting to diminish and it's starting to lose light. So it's kind of like that lunar phase of disseminating, where we're starting to give back or put to use or issue forth any of the fruits of this lunar cycle, the intentions and insights that came our way, the way that we were able to reflect on and reap the benefits of at the full moon. Now we sort of see that it's time to kind of start sowing it or giving it back. So that's the phase that we're in now, midweek. And then of course that's an earth trine because, that's an air trine because the moon is, that's an air trine because the moon is in Gemini and the sun is in Libra. So it's a lively, waning gibbous moon nonetheless. It still has a lot of energy and curiosity, and it can still be a little bit catalytic and inspiring, but now it's about figuring out where to direct our energy to finish things, to close things, or having some clarity on what we're going to do moving forward. Then, of course, anytime the moon is in a mutable sign these days, it comes into a hard or potent aspect with Neptune. So if we've got the moon in Gemini, which is mutable air, it's square Neptune, which is hanging out in mutable water sign Pisces for quite some time. So in the modern astrology scheme, Neptune is seen as kind of like a sub-ruler of Pisces, Jupiter being the true or the original ruler of Pisces. But both of those planets have an expansive quality. Like Jupiter is expansive and, you know, dissolving boundaries and this sort of thing. But then Neptune is like the transpersonal version of that, like transcending boundaries, or, you know, going up into that world of like, maybe this is all a dream, maybe this is all an illusion. Well, what is material anyway? Maybe matter is just compressed energy, and everything can be affected by like our mind and our intention. And so it's got an ethereal quality, and it carries us into that world of mystery and escape that can be a bit addictive, and it can be hard to come back from if we lose our way and lose our grounding and lose our you know, connection to this material world, which, you know, me being so earthy, I always promote it's good, as I said, to have a little toe on the ground while you're exploring expansive and transcendental states or ideas. So that sort of thing comes to mind when every time these Moon Neptune squares come around. It's like that little tug of war of, I want to, you know, think about this and I'm feeling this, but I'm feeling this friction or this urge to kind of like drift away or escape. And it can be a little bit confusing. Maybe it can be a little bit dissociative. Maybe it can kind of push the emotions around in some, you know, a lot of different directions, especially with that lively Gemini moon. So I don't know about you. I don't know if it's just because I'm Cancer rising and I really feel moon activity in a strong way, but I always find when the moon squared Neptune, I can't concentrate. And I mean, not being able to concentrate, that can be a good mental or consciousness state for things that you don't necessarily need to fix or focus your concentration on. And it can be really good for just listening to music, trancing out, delving into your imagination, this sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know if you've noticed that. I notice it. So when I see it coming, I lower my expectations about how productive I'm going to be for a couple of hours, and then maybe switch gears and allow myself to indulge in my imagination for a while, because that can be helpful. It can be good to charge up your imaginative capacities, because it can be really inspiring, and it can keep you from getting too rooted or fixed in a certain perspective. And sometimes we let our imagination drift for a little while. We can even get ideas or insights about how to approach a practical matter with maybe like that sort of Neptunian bird's eye view of seeing the big expansive picture. Then in the afternoon, we have Mercury, who, remember, is now in Scorpio. This is the sign that Mercury is going to go retrograde in soon. So Mercury is opposite Uranus in the afternoon, which brings, you know, the planet of communication and the planet of sudden changes into a charged, polarized you know, connection or conversation. So that's where, you know, mentally or verbally or in the communication process somehow really powerfully the energies of Uranus get drawn into those expressions, and even just into like our awareness, like surprise things could happen, surprise revelations in how we express ourselves or what we communicate, out of the blue news, like what, where did that come from? And then having to sort out the implications of this thing that Uranus likes to drop in our lap. Oh yeah, that. Okay. let's regroup, let's figure this out, and figure out how to adapt and flow with it, or and sometimes it isn't even about being useful. It's just about, oh yeah, right. Everything's changing all the time. So something about what we're trying to understand or synthesize or communicate has to contend with that curveball in the afternoon on Wednesday, which is Mercury's day of the week, which is interesting. So anytime you have Mercury aspects on Mercury's own day, they may have a special resonance or a special potency. And certainly this one is significant, this Mercury opposite Uranus, because that's going to repeat, because when Mercury goes retrograde soon, it's going to loop around and come back to have that oppositional conversation with Uranus again. And that date is October 19th. So if anything pops up on the 7th, expect to maybe revisit that around October 19th. There may be an opportunity to go back into things that you set in motion and got to work on, or a change or a curveball popped up that you're figuring out how to integrate and adapt and flow with. That something about what comes up around that time, or a theme that's similar to that, might come up around the 19th. So yeah, we're heading for a Mercury retrograde. I feel like this is like one of the first moments where we're going to be like, whoop, things are getting interesting. Where is this leading? And it might be setting some of the tones or some of the themes for the stuff that we're going to uncork and explore during the retrograde passage. I know that the Mercury retrogrades, they get a lot of play, like in the memes and the way that people, expect them to occur. I may have said this in another video, but it can really depend on your own birth chart. Mercury, the condition of Mercury in your birth chart. Are you a very mercurial person? Do you have a lot of Mercury ruled placements? Were you born with Mercury retrograde natally? Sometimes these folks can be uniquely or strangely immune to Mercury retrograde passages. It's almost like they're kind of born with a bit of an advantage, because if you're born with a Mercury retrograde, you've learned how to work with Mercury retrograde energy your whole entire life, with your unique way of communicating or adapting maybe to some challenges you had early in your life around Mercury things. So I've heard reports of that when Mercury retrogrades pop up for folks that are born with Mercury retrograde. They have maybe sometimes like this funny, uncanny feeling that actually everything's working out for a change. I'm flowing with this. This is fine. It's a cakewalk. There may be people that feel differently, like maybe it just compounds it or intensifies it. But anyway, just all that to say, the Mercury retrogrades really, they don't do exactly the same thing to everybody exactly the same way the whole entire time. There's a lot of factors that can modulate what that's going to be like. I just think this Mercury retrograde is going to be interesting because it's going to go back into Libra, and then we know that when Mercury was in Libra, it was in a square and oppositional aspect to those really intense planetary placements in Capricorn and Mars in Aries. So retreading back into that territory again. So like I say, I feel like on Wednesday the 7th, this might be the first murmurings of some of the interesting ground that we're going to be covering and exploring during the Mercury retrograde passage. And I think the whole point of this digression I just went into was to say it's coming, but don't just expect that it's all going to be bad or it's all going to be difficult. There may be some difficult things to untie and untangle, but these are also really good opportunities to slow down and go back into reframe, rework, and rediscover new depth and new insight in our communications, that when Mercury goes forward again, eventually, we move forward now with all of that new insight and opportunity, and then we get to kind of redo everything again and go, oh, okay, I think I understand now, or I'm refined, or my awareness has been clarified. So managing your expectations and setting you up for this ride we're about to go on, and I'll talk in more detail about that when it comes. So yeah, pay attention. Mercury opposite Uranus, it's going to repeat on the 19th when Mercury's retrograde, and we'll see if things that pop up now are somehow uniquely linked or echoed, or like echoed back around that time. Then we get the moon in Gemini sextile Mars in the evening, which could be really stimulating and lively. The moon is very lively, and Mars is very charged, so it could be just an energetic passage on Wednesday evening. Then Thursday the 8th, the day pretty much begins with the moon entering Cancer, and this is when that void of course passage ends, and we've got a whole couple of days of making new starts and beginning and getting back into that rhythm again. This is the moon's home sign, so when the moon is in Cancer, typically it's a receptive time, a reflective time, and often folks, especially people really tuned into the moon, feel a bit more private or a bit more insular, or emotions are a little bit more raw. The intuition feels a little bit stronger, and we're picking up, deeper or more profound messages floating in the lunar currents. So yeah, it's a couple of days of the moon there. Kind of raw, vulnerable feelings sometimes prevail. And then of course it's a little edgy because it's in square aspect to these really powerful cardinal planets, which we'll talk about a little more. The square feeling gets started a little later when the moon is square Chiron in Aries. And that, of course, is a time where, raw, tender emotions come into a little bit of a friction aspect, or a bit of an impasse with these themes, Chiron's themes of healing. So maybe there's a couple of hours there of reflecting on those themes, and maybe feeling like some buttons got pushed, or this kind of tender or raw area emotionally gets highlighted. Or if it does, it's an opportunity to focus on that and work with it or work through it a little bit. And then the rest of the day, it's kind of quiet. The moon is sextile Venus in the evening. Venus is in Virgo and the moon is in Cancer, so that's a nice harmonious blend of lunar and Venusian energy, water and earth melding very well, feeling and grounding in practicality and sensuality. So it could be a really nice way to end Thursday, just feeling inspired but grounded, and just a nice flowing sense of well-being. And then we get to Friday the 9th. It's another busy aspect Friday. There's been a few of those lately. Very early morning, a moon sextile Uranus, so the Cancer moon flowing in harmony with those themes of surprises and changes. Then the moon moves on a little later, but still quite early in the morning, to have a trine with Mercury, a water trine with Mercury, because Mercury is in Scorpio. So that can open up a passage for a couple of hours of a lot of really potent and intimate emotional communications being facilitated or supported or flowing really well. Then we get Mars square Pluto kind of starting the day off, and that's another repeat. We had that aspect already when Mars was direct and Pluto was retrograde, so another switch in direction. And the last time that happened was on August the 13th. So again, there could be something that kicked up around that time that we're seeing a redo or a reactivation of, and that's a clash between these really strong, inflammatory, martial powers clashing against Pluto's significations of, deep transformation, irreversible change, or contending with hidden powers, secretive powers, underworld kind of dealings that have really profound implications. So we'll see if something like that pops up in the collective, like in the news on the broader global scape. And maybe there's a passage there, at least for that day, that those themes are hitting us or impacting us on a personal level. So it could feel like a bit of friction. I mean, Pluto's quite, far away, and it's not like a giant planet proper, but it seems to have a lot of influence and a lot of effect nevertheless. So we'll see, we'll check in with that one. Then of course the moon in Cancer will form a square with the sun in Libra. So this is when we're at the last quarter moon. So that's like a perfect half moon, and then from there it starts diminishing into the crescent and then disappears into the darkness of the new moon phase. So we're at that last turn, that last corner of the lunar cycle, where because it's a moon square sun, it could feel kind of catalytic, like there's some last final tasks before we turn in and tune in to the rebirth or reemergence passage of the new moon. But at this point, the lunar energies start to kind of tamp down and lower. And certainly if we're trying to time any charts, like, like elections or magical workings or anything like this, we're starting to get into a zone where the moon is going to be pretty low, and it's going to be running low on juice. So there's only so much power we can expect the moon to exert. But there's really appropriate and nice things to do during that quarter moon phase. And like I said, final tasks, powering down, beginning to tune in, starting to become a little bit more reflective and introspective and conserving our energy. Then the moon is opposite Jupiter. That signature can have the effect of kind of amplifying the emotions or amplifying our sense of hope or optimism. It can sometimes feel like a bit of an emotional high, like, whoa, I'm feeling inspired. But I mean, it's like in those more receptive elements. The moon is in water, so it's a bit more intuitive and reflective, and Jupiter's in Capricorn, which is earth, and that's more grounded and more pragmatic. So it could just be a high emotional vibe that or heightened vibe, I should say, that at the same time feels kind of interesting, kind of low-key and reflective. So we can tune into that on Friday evening. And then of course Friday ends with that moon trine Neptune, water trine Neptune, super dreamy, super imaginative, super creative, intuitive, somewhat psychic in its potential. I feel like it opens up this really dreamy, emotive portal. Again, anytime I see the moon making strong aspects with Neptune, I modulate my expectations. But I kind of think that, Friday night, it's a time to relax and be creative and recharge the imagination anyway. So I can't see it interfering with anything, more practical or more productive. So yeah. And it could be, it's water and it's really potent. So sometimes it's really, really profound or raw or vulnerable, like emotional expressions or emissions or tearing up, but, not in a way that's, a tearing from, suffering or anguish, but maybe a tearing up of overwhelming feelings that are rising up to the surface that could even be joyous. And because it's happening shortly after a moon opposite Jupiter, that's a lot of expansive emotional energy for the evening. So it'd be interesting to tune in and see what comes of that. Saturday, October the 10th, early morning, there's a moon square Mars because the moon is in Cancer and the moon is in or Mars is in Aries, that can create some friction and edginess. Mars is very temperamental anyway, but especially so in Aries, and the moon is really, really vulnerable and tender and raw in Cancer. So I think those two flavors don't mix easily or mix well, but it's 3 a.m, so I don't know. I don't think that it's going to be something that we feel like really acutely. It could just be waking up in the morning, just sort of feeling a little bit raw or vulnerable or edgy, or just having this feeling like, I just feel like I'm a walking nerve, or my buttons could be pushed really easily right now. And then there's some edgier aspects that continue after that carry us into the way that the day opens. So it could add on to that feeling. The moon opposite Pluto, and then of course the moon opposite Saturn. Pluto and Saturn are in Capricorn in polarity to the really powerful moon in Cancer. So edgy feelings, raw feelings, raw emotional awareness around, the changes or the heavy burdens or the things that are, really profound this year. That could kind of cycle through our consciousness or awareness early Saturday morning. At that point, the moon goes void of course again. So for the rest of the day, finishing up loose ends, not necessarily beginning anything super important if it can wait. And then we have the Venus trine Uranus, which is a nice earth trine between Venus in an earthy expression and Taurus, who's adding that kind of earthly influence to Uranus's, powers to bring sudden changes that we talked about in a little bit more length earlier. But this is harmonious, and this is really flowing, and it can be really nice. It can bring, since it's like an earth trine, which makes me think of like, routines and rootedness and practicality. In a harmonious and workable way, it could bring some surprises on the romantic front, like feelings of romance or sudden expressions of romantic feelings, or just a nice feeling of well-being, but kind of getting off the beaten track or doing something unusual or unexpected that isn't jarring and shocking and surprising, but is pleasantly unusual, if that makes sense. And that can set the stage for interesting romantic occurrences or connections or feelings that come to light. And I kind of feel like that's a pretty creative signature too. There could be people out there who are working on artistic projects of some kind, and you might have maybe a boost or a turning point that you could tap into around that time. Like take your artwork, your creativity in an expressive new direction. And since it's in earth, it might be something you feel it's like tangible and useful, and you can get your hands on and go, oh, okay, I think I know, I got a new idea. So some new ideas might pop up around that time for people. Or if you're feeling uninspired, you could tune in around that time and think about this signature, think about this aspect, and see if it stokes your imagination or inspires you, maybe to do an activity to cultivate it or draw it into your awareness or into your life. Then in the early evening, the moon enters Leo, and then things heat up and feel a little bit more fiery and expressive again. The moon void of course ends, so the next couple of days, that's the good time to make those new starts that we hope will last long term. So that's kind of a nice feeling too to end Saturday on. Saturday's last major aspect is that kind of fun and enthusiastic and dramatic Leo moon energy. And then the last day of the week, Sunday, October the 11th, early morning, now that the moon is in Leo, it forms a fire trine with Chiron and Aries. So that can be a really healing and supportive and inspiring little transit that maybe, could help people feel a little bit more like courageous or emboldened or encouraged when holding space for or thinking about working with ongoing wounds. Then we have the Sun square Jupiter. The Sun is in Libra and Jupiter is in Capricorn. Jupiter's direct now, so things are starting to move along and improve and play out as they are going to for the rest of the year. So that's an edgy aspect. The square aspect, it's really catalytic and could prompt some change. The Sun, represents consciousness or waking consciousness or conscious awareness, leadership, where energy is being spent or directed at the moment. And certainly in this Libra season, it's a lot of thought and consciousness and awareness directed toward diplomatic matters or keeping the peace or finding the balance in our lives and collectively. So the Sun, it's energetic, and Jupiter is also quite, bountiful and energetic. So if they come into this square, as I said, it can be really catalyzing and amplifying. So something could kind of get blown up, like something brought to our awareness in a big way that we can't ignore, like a turning point. Like Jupiter's associated with things like, because it's in Capricorn this year, obviously it's associated with financial matters and markets to some extent, but Jupiter's associated to things like law and justice and our highest values. And then the Sun, that conscious awareness in Libra, that, that's a huge symbol for justice or things being, fair or meted out in an equal manner. So I'm just sort of wondering if around that time, there's going to be an amplified awareness about a matter that has to do with law and justice and highest values that could pop up in our life personally, or we could see play out collectively around us. Then later in the morning, the Moon is square Uranus. That's a little bit more of an edgy feeling because the Moon is in fixed fire Leo. Uranus is in fixed Earth Taurus. So fixed squares always have a bit of a stubborn kind of quality where they're pushing on each other, but neither one really wants to move or budge. So because it's the Moon in dramatic and expressive Leo, and Uranus brings these upsets and surprises, it could just be a bit of an edgy emotional time, weirdly creative, kind of strange, dissonant mood for a couple of hours that might not be entirely unpleasant, but maybe just a bit unusual, if that makes sense. And then the last major aspect of the week is the Moon square Mercury, coming off like this fading kind of signature of this edgy Moon Uranus square. Feel like that's kind of feeding into conversations being a bit confused or feeling like things are working at cross purposes for a couple of hours. The Moon in Leo, dramatic and immediate and very passionate and bold and direct in expression. And then Mercury in Scorpio, which is quite receptive and maybe somewhat contractive, like a quality of concentration or communication that's very deep and very probing and very incisive, kind of rubbing up against this very enthusiastic lunar energy. It could just be a passage where trying to figure out what you need to express emotionally. It's taking some time, or it feels a bit slowed down, or you're kind of searching for the words through Mercury in this more contemplative sign. So yeah, maybe it might not, I say, show up for folks exactly the same because everybody's sort of set up differently. It just could make things feel a little bit like there's some friction there, trying to explain ourselves or express ourselves or be articulate. And that's the last planetary aspect of the week. I don't know if you can hear my dog. He's sleeping beside me. He's having a dream where he's kind of yelping in his dream. Oh, I think he's done. But anyway, he made an appearance in my last video, so maybe this is going to become a tradition. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that weekly forecast. I have some ideas again for other videos. It's just figuring out the time. If you want to work directly with me to find out about what's happening in your own birth chart, please be in touch as always. I'm here, and yeah, we'll see you soon. Take care.